aber schaffen für jeden begleich. Oi, wo nehmt men ein bissele, oi, Gott, ein bissele Masel, ein bissele.
Zum ersten Mal hat ihr gesehen und ihr gebeten allein, wenn hat häufig das gewollt. Und seit schon dann pflegt nicht noch treten, oft nur bei ihr gebeten, sei mein, ich schied die Gott mit Gott. Ich bin der Poritz fin ganzen Städte, leg dein Kapzon, ich kleide, wart, aber ich malke, mach ich dir, ich will gar von dir, gar a kleinem Naden, sollst du sich vor mir abschmaden, in meine Palazze nehm ich dich zu sich. Oi, du mein Bescherte, deine süße Werte, sonnen so schön wie du. Tate Mame und das ganze Städte schelten wollen mir. Rifkele die Kleine, die Znies die Geschene, is entlaufen mit der Goi. Und an Stott der Schule gar in der Kloster dort, will ich nur sein.
Hello. Hi, good evening, and welcome to Life Unworthy of Life. coming at you live from Hamburg. Hello to everybody at the live streaming right now, and hello to everybody who will watch this at some point in the future. I've never done a live streaming, so I'm not sure if I should behave any differently than I would normally, but I'm just aware that that is happening. And we're in the middle of a pandemic, and I've never done a show before in the middle of a pandemic, which is to be expected, I guess. So for me, it's a little bit alarming or something like this, like a shock to my system, because I've been spending the past 7 months in Brooklyn, New York, only in the same 4-block radius, really, I promise. And so then to fly across the ocean and come here to perform, it's like, what? You know, and even just being seen in front of people right now is super strange, because I've been like spending the majority of my time in bed, you know, making sure I'm prepared from like here up for Zoom. Who knows what's going on down there, you know? And yeah, and it's also like, you know, I had to find another costume, which for me is just like a different piece of leather that I would wear, just because it's like my ass. It's almost like it grew another ass in this time, which maybe some of you can relate to. I'm not sure. Yeah, it sounds kind of like some of you also might have found new forms that your body could take that you didn't know before. So that's exciting. Yeah, maybe the world narrows, and to make up for it, the ass grows. That's a theory I have, and that's like a corona joke that I'm making. And also just that I've learned like how babies get diaper rashes, that I get like a mask rash. So it's like a rash that you would normally have on an unseen part of the body is now on the normally most seen part of the body. So that's really exciting as well, to get a mask rash, right? I don't know if I have any other corona jokes to make right now. I'm working on it actively, I guess. And mainly I would just be telling them to myself, alone in my room. But now I'm with you, and I'm with everybody that I can't see on the internet, telling these jokes. I had done this show a year ago, and I had a very different attitude then anyway, about the material that I'll be talking about, and about how it feels to talk about that right now, given the pandemic and other events as well. So in some ways I'm prepared, and in other ways I'm not really prepared for how I'm going to talk about things. So as you know, this show is a queer dis/crip talk show. And the reason why I wanted to make a talk show is because normally in America, late night shows are hosted by men. They're mostly straight, cisgendered, white men, and those are the ones that have had the most success over time with these shows. They've had like 20-year careers with these shows, and there really haven't been many women. And if there have been, they haven't lasted nearly as long, let alone queer women or any disabled anything at all. anyone. So I was like, well, then I'm going to do that. And so now, you're part of this kind of ground-breaking event of going to a late-night talk show with a host who is a queer Crip. So the nature of this show is that I will give a monologue with certain themes, and then I'm going to do an interview with a special guest. And my special guest tonight is Kenny Freas, who is an American writer. He currently lives in Berlin. He will be joining us over the incredible new aesthetic technology called Zoom. And we will get to see his library. And we will get to see him in a polo shirt smiling. And before, he would join me on the stage. But this is the safest way for us to be together. And I do think right now is a way of learning how to be together differently. So Kenny is incredibly important in general, and to me in a number of ways, as somebody who thinks through history and who asks himself very hard questions and writes about all of it. So as you can see in your programs here, he's a memoirist who's published 3 books, and who also was an editor of the first anthology of multi-genre writing by disabled people. Kenny is a tireless advocate for disabled people and writers, and he's currently doing research on a new book that is something we're going to talk about in our interview later. If it wasn't for Kenny, I really wouldn't have any idea about the history of oppression of disabled people. Not because I didn't experience the oppression myself in my own life, but because there has not been enough history written. So while I'm discussing that, the title Life Unworthy of Life, have you ever seen that term before? Just a raise of hands of anyone who has seen that term before. Oh my gosh, that is a lot of people. I'm really impressed by that or something. That's the most number of people who have been able to recognize that title that I've had in an audience. And so I'm going to just describe this a bit more. So the title Life Unworthy of Life is not something that I made up. It's actually the name of a certified document that would catalog whether or not a disabled person was literally worthy of life, which was a decision being made by a supposed doctor, which is part of a project called Action T4 that was started before World War II and actually which continued after. I'm going to be referencing that project, that particular program throughout the show. So as well, I just need to let you know that we're going to be talking about things with each other during the show. I'll be asking you questions, which is why you have your masks still on, because if you do want to answer, we will have people coming with mics for you to speak into. And it's definitely like part of the show. It's expected that we'll talk with each other. And also for everybody who's on the live stream, when I ask a question, you can type your answer like in a comment, and you can send a WhatsApp to my friend Maria here, who will either, I forgot how it's going to work. One way or another, Maria is going to get me your question, and I'll be able to say it out loud. Or even, I think if you call her, then we're going to put a mic up to the speaker of her phone so that everybody can hear it. Sure. I mean, let's try anything. It's fine. It'll be great. So a background on me, just to overshare continually. You already know about my ass expansion. What more is there? Is that when I was a child, my family moved from like a rural part of a state in the United States to a small town. And when they did that, I needed to make new friends. And I actually didn't know how that worked. So my mom said, just wait by the phone, and that eventually you're going to get a phone call. That will be like a friend who wants to play with you. And so for those of you in the audience who might not know about this historic predate of the cell phone, there was just a landline. I'm dating myself here by saying that, but there was a landline, so you had to actually like sit by the phone and wait. And the phone was on a cord, you know, it didn't travel. So I sat and waited by this phone in the wall, and then eventually it rang, and I picked it up, and it was somebody named Jessica, who was inviting me to play with her and her friends. She gave me her address, and I walked to her house, and she lived at the top of this big hill. And just for a little bit of imagery, I was like a very young Jewish nerd, very awkward. I had Coke bottle glasses. I had like a button-up shirt that I never could button right, so it'd always be like really, you know, like a bunch, like one half of the shirt was here and then the other half was like here. And with some dirty shorts or something like that. And I'm at the bottom of the hill and I'm looking up and I see a group of girls who are sitting at the top and who are playing some kind of game where they're clapping hands and touching them. And so in America, that's called patty cake. And I've been told here it's called baka baka kuchen. Oh my God, I can't even tell if you're laughing because you recognize that or because you're like, oh, you're so funny when you're trying to speak German. Oh no, oh good. Okay, good. But I will say that for the sake of the story, I'm just going to call it baka baka, you know, and we're all gonna get that. So they're doing the baka baka at the top of this hill, and I'm getting there, and as I'm getting there, I'm terrified because I have terrible hand-eye coordination, as is to be expected, I have to say. And so then I'm just like, I'm going to fail at this immediately. They're going to see what a loser I am, and I'm not going to be part of their group. I should just give up. But I'm like halfway there, and they can see me, you know. So I keep on going, and then I hear them singing, and they're singing in unison. And then I was like, oh no, like there's no way I could sing in unison and baka baka at the same time. Like this is wrong. I should turn back or something, you know. So in spite of my fear, I like walk toward them. And what I hear, it doesn't really align with what it looks like is like just a sweet girls game, you know? So I'm hearing these words that are words my parents had told me about like the worst kind of racist terms for people like us, which we now call hate speech, but back then it was just speech. And I hadn't heard anyone actually use that speech or use that speech around me yet. So in order for me to be able to tell you the lyrics of the song, I have to like reference these words. Now, last night I called them derogatory words toward Jews and people of color. But some of the people in the audience didn't understand the word derogatory. So I'm just going to say they're bad words, you know. Just think of the worst words. And those were the words that were part of the lyrics. So they're doing the baka baka, right? Cute girls. And from here on out, I'm going to call them the Jessicas, just all of them, okay? So the Jessicas are going at it, and I get closer, and I hear these words, and then I hear the lyrics entirely, and the lyrics go something like, well, we don't want to get near those blanks or blanks. Because of them ugly faces, we'd rather be dead than mixing the races. I don't know if you're even able to follow the dissonance of that kind of thing, you know, of what looks like an innocent game and then like becomes this other thing. And it's sort of like if you can imagine me approaching this group on top of a hill, hearing this song, and somehow it's like everything around me just like narrowed, right, into this sort of like pool of isolation, even though I'm meeting these new friends. Because I want them to like me, because they're going to be my first friends there. But at the same time, I'm terrified of what I just heard. And I'm like, are they going to kill me? Is this like a plot against me or something? Is this it? Is this like my first day here and then that's it? So I tried to be really polite, you know, and I approached them and I asked them, hey, those are some interesting lyrics. Where did you pick up on that? And one of the Jessicas said, we just like heard our dad sing this song while doing the dishes the other day. And we decided to memorize it. Okay, you know, so your dad's a white supremacist? I mean, white supremacists also do their dishes, true. But I didn't really like probe into it. I just said, I definitely can't play this game if we're going to play it with this song, but I'd play another game with you. And I'm also like really bad at clapping, so we could play a game that also doesn't involve clapping. And they were like, you're weird because how could you be bad at clapping? But that was my way of being funny to also try to get out of something that seemed really scary. And I wanted to actually ask you if you have had in your childhood an example of doing something to be accepted by a group of people that later you felt like, wasn't so good, or even at the time you might have felt like, I don't know if this is right, but I need to do it anyway. If you have a memory of this, raise your hand and then we'll bring you the mic. Or you can type it into the YouTube comments or text or call Maria. Okay. Someone in the center. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah.
So I remember really well how I was in kindergarten, and I was this not very, sagt man so mädchenhaft, sissy.
You were not a Jessica.
I was not really a Jessica, maybe. I was not so girlish. I was more like this boyish, little bit clumsy.
Oh, so we would have been friends.
Probably.
That's cool. Yeah.
And I also felt like I didn't fit in many ways. And there were these two girls, my Jessicas, Friederike Obst and Nicola.
Oh, you remember their names?
Yes, because she was actually called Friederike Fruit. So this is why I can remember really well.
Okay.
And so I really wanted to play with them as well. And they wouldn't let me most of the time. So they said to me, you can play with us
Yeah.
if you bring us stuff from your home. If you not just bring it, but if you like give it to us.
Oh.
So
A Barbie.
I had to bring a Barbie and I had to bring chips.
Priorities.
This is all I remember. It was like there was always a condition what I had to give them or bring them from home so that I could join. But then most of the time they wouldn't let me join anyway.
Really?
Yeah.
But would they take the stuff you brought them?
I don't actually remember. I just remember them telling me that, and I remember looking at home for stuff I could bring. But I don't remember this situation of giving it to them or playing with them. I don't know.
Do you remember, like, trying multiple times to join them? Wait, I'm confused. I just need to ask you.
Yeah, sure.
Are you with your mother?
Yeah, this is why I keep looking at her, like wondering, do you maybe remember how it was? Because I was maybe 4 or something.
Oh,
so
yeah.
this
Oh,
is
that's
why I
very
don't
young.
remember well.
Wow. So does your mom remember this story or no?
Oh, yes,
You do?
yes.
Okay, wait. This is go.
I talked to the lady of the kindergarten that led the group, and I told them, how can this be? This is terrible. And they said, this is a problem that the kids have to solve among themselves.
I think you just made the show for me. I'm good. It's good.
It was just the attitude, and I was shocked, because I thought there should be certain rules, but at that point, in the modern kindergarten, it was a Waldkindergarten, a kindergarten in the forest, and this were all the concept was kind of alternative, and they had this attitude: we adults don't interfere. Intervene. And it took me a long time to understand that this concept is pure bullshit.
No, I don't agree. I don't agree.
Oh, you don't agree?
No, I don't agree.
Say more.
I don't want to steal your thunder.
But I mean, I'm not saying say more like just for the sake of joking about it. I'm curious about it.
No, I mean, probably there were some moments where I would have definitely wished for someone to intervene. But then again, sometimes as a kid, it's true that you have to figure stuff out, and that in the end, sometimes it's about the respect you get. And I think when there's an adult coming and saying like, don't fuck with my kid, you probably get less respect in the end, you know, by the other kids. So it's
Is that finger like you want to say something back, Mom?
When she's ready.
Oh, yeah.
Are you
Oh,
ready?
sorry.
yeah.
Well,
Wow.
I mean, any mother knows this situation where the kids tell you something of a situation of the school, and you think, how can that be? And the kid tells you, Mama, keep out of it.
Oh.
And the condition of telling you the problem is that you don't intervene. And I think it's another thing. One thing is constantly to intervene to protect your child, which I think I wouldn't do, and I tried not to do.
You never did.
The other thing is, another thing is that ethic rules are not naturally coming out of human beings and not naturally coming out of kids. Kids can be very brutal. And I think it's up to every one of us to make sure certain things are not okay.
I sort of feel like you should do the show.
To add something, I had...
Yes, Mom.
Sorry. I should shut up?
No, I mean,
When I was a child, when I was a child,
yes.
I went to the first class and
Grade.
in the first grade, and we had a boy in this classroom, and he was obviously discriminated. He came from a very poor background, and his clothes were not okay, and they told us, it was a saying about him, there are 12 kids at home, and every kid has a different father, and when he had done something that the teacher didn't like, the teacher told us not to play with him in the break, during the break in the playground. And I'm still very proud of my parents that I had, as a child already, a sort of understanding that this is not okay. And for me, it was clear at that point, I go to this child and I talk to him. I do something. And it was because of the understanding that I was taught. But I must say, my parents weren't very progressive, democratic parents, not at all. It was just a sort of understanding they had. My father was a clear Nazi. He had been, I'm the generation for the young people who sit here, the grand people were the Nazis. For my generation, my parents were Nazis. Not my mother so much, my father definitely. So, and this is a mixture. I just wanted to say that I was happy, and I'm still happy that I was enabled to be more fair towards this boy and to like him. But still...
Wow, that went in a lot of directions, you know.
So
You
I'm
know.
finished now.
Yeah, no, I wasn't saying that to make you stop. I just was observing that it seems sort of like the ethics that at a moment maybe wait, I'm not sure if just hang with the microphone for a second, just to give a chance, you know. This is very new for me to have this intergenerational moment. I'm sure you both didn't know what was going to happen when you sat down. I didn't know either, though, so we're equal right now. Yeah, I was just observing that it sounds like you learned something somehow about how to treat somebody else. Yeah. But yeah, it also sounds like maybe that's complex in your family dynamic, that maybe not everybody learned that, even though you had the same parents. Would you say that that's true? Yeah, yeah. That's actually like a wonderful story to hear, and it's something that I think Kenny will speak to in our interview a little bit. I don't want to give away what we're going to speak about, and also then I would turn the performance even more into some kind of class. So I'll just put that aside. But yeah, I guess one thing that I would say is that something that Kenny speaks about when he is doing his research, and that it has made me think about, is like, for everyone who is persecuted, there are parents and siblings and larger structures who either can do something about it or not. In every kind of crisis of history, this exists. And so I'm just going to leave that there as a hint to something later. And I'm going to maybe try to return to the show. But yeah, I think one other thing I want to say about what you have both shared is this interesting rift between the idea of self-determination as a child, like that the parent should stay out of it, and then on the other side, the idea that the child might not know the trouble they're in and might need a guardian or might need somebody to teach them what is right or something like this. I feel like what you have both shared and the differences you have say everything about trying to live a life with at least a minimal amount of harm toward others in a conscious way, right? Like, is that even a possible desire? I've never asked that in a show before. But thank you. It's very nice to meet you both. And maybe you'll have more to share. But I feel like normally I get a few stories. So maybe we do one other story, and then I'll continue to talk. I'm confused. The person up there? Or, wait. Oh,
Yes,
it's a live stream moment. Maria.
Yes, that's a live stream moment. And the person from the live stream wants also to share the story.
Yeah.
And to the question if there was something that the person didn't want to do when the group asked. And the group asked to citation to say Bloody Mary 3 times and turn around 3 times. And then I would see Bloody Mary in the mirror. And it terrified me so much. And I experienced this way of fear which I couldn't find words for. And I didn't understand why I couldn't just be like them and do what they wanted. End of citation.
Oh, okay. Huh. Normally I would ask follow-up things about that, right? But I guess one thing I'd say to respond to that comment is that it's maybe unfortunate that the person would feel shame for their fear, right? But also this idea of that they were trying to push themselves past a limit of fear in order to be accepted, which just made them even more afraid in the end, right? Okay. So bringing this back also to my story that I told you about me trying to make friends is that that was the beginning for me of sort of being in service of others who were part of a dominant culture. And so, like, my identity was really just about being in service in that way. It wasn't really about expressing that identity. So I learned early on how to hide parts of it and hide the pain of that in order to be accepted by others. And this continued on in a lot of ways, or it became, as I got older, it became very hard for me to grapple with the way that I had to act in order to be accepted, and then like what I knew of my history or myself. So I have another question for the audience, and that is if you remember any books that you really liked when you were, I don't know, anywhere between like 10 years old and 13 years old. A favorite book.
Actually, when I was 13, I read by accident because I found the book in the bookshelf from my mom. Because it was a really small book and it has a pretty illustration, I just thought, like, this must be, like, for me, probably. And it was The Little Prince. And I think that was the first, like, real book that I actually read, which was not children's literature. But it is, like, written in a way that children can still understand. Yeah.
Do you remember what about the book exactly you liked the most or made you happy or something?
I think it was, first of all, the combination still between written and written words and illustrations, because I thought, like, this is still, well, I mean, looking back, I'm thinking it's still accessible for a child, but also made me, like, really proud that I read something that was not made for children, obviously, because it was very moralistic, and it has, like, this deep story of understanding love and connection between humans, and do you know it? The Little Prince? Yeah, and I felt really proud that I, like, understood this book. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyone else also want to share what they remember? Over here.
Hi. Well, I would not like to share a book because I was not really much the reading kind of kid in my life, but maybe, I don't know if it would be also interesting about, for example, music. I remember very clearly when I was 11 and I was doing the dishes, and somehow I discovered music for the first time. And it was really magical. So just to counterpart, maybe.
I'm sorry, I'm having a bit of a hard time hearing you.
Really?
Yes.
Is this the mask?
It is the mask.
Oh.
We can do it. We can do it.
We can do it.
I understood what I understood. This is just a COVID art-making moment. You know, we're having a moment. But we have to stay safe, and
yes,
it's okay. And also, I want to know what you say. So
yeah.
I just had to take a pause because
okay, sorry.
we act like, oh, there's something wrong.
No, yeah.
But there's actually nothing wrong. What's wrong is there's a pandemic. That's
yeah,
what's wrong. So what I understood was that you learned English through a certain author.
No.
No, that's...
Oh, really? This mask is really not helping at all. Yeah, but I think I normally don't speak very clearly, and I'm not German, so maybe my English accent is not very easy to understand. Is it
okay.
better now?
It's better now.
Okay, so I'm just gonna restart. Well, what I would like to bring, maybe it's a very different thing, maybe to bring something very different to the discussion, is that you asked specifically if anyone had read some book that they remembered from the ages from 11 to 13 or something. But I was never really the kind of reading in my teenage days.
Okay.
So the thing that I would like to bring up to the discussion maybe is that when I was doing the dishes one day,
Yes.
I started listening to some blues on the radio.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe. I swear what I thought I heard you say for a moment before was that you learned English by reading Dickens.
No.
What you really said was almost like the exact opposite
Yes.
of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, no, it
Okay.
was just that I don't know if that was your question, but I just felt interesting to share a different perspective because, like, books are not always the only way that people connect with something or something, and I felt the impulse to share that I discovered music.
You discovered music. Yeah.
For the first time when I was 11 and doing the dishes, and I listened to this great blues song on the radio, and well, it's been, I don't know, a couple of years ago, but it was very interesting to me. So it was not a book, and I don't remember specifically which song that was, but I don't know if that actually applies to the discussion.
Do you even remember like the singer or anything? Or
No, I don't. It was, I mean, I was 11, so that means it was, how long? Maybe almost, I don't know how many years ago, more than 15 years ago. And,
Yeah,
And I don't know if anyone remembers what it was like listening to the radio. If you were 11, you couldn't tell who that really was, especially if it was some kind of music that only your parents would know. So I was 11.
Oh, I see. I get it now. I'm putting it all together. The timeline of your youth. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I would say I appreciate that. For the sake of this show and some key points I'm trying to arrive at, I do really care about discussing the books. But I will say this, hearing you talk about that is a wonderful antidote to my story of hearing parents singing this song, learning that parents were singing that song while doing the dishes. You know what I mean? So hearing that you learned the blues while doing the dishes really helps. You know what I mean? To offset one story of trauma of dishes and singing. This is a much better story. That's what I mean. But I'm wondering if anybody could talk about books that they read between the ages of 10 and 13 that they remember, like that they loved, and that really, I don't know, formed some kind of young idea of themselves. I knew you were going to raise your hand. I don't even know you, but I was like, knew it. Go ahead.
So this was in my 8th grade class. I was 13, and
Okay.
it was one of the books that we were assigned to read. And I forget the author's name, but the name of the book was Years of Impossible Goodbyes.
Oh.
And it was written by a Korean woman who had migrated to the United States after the, excuse me, after the Japanese occupation of Korea. And she was also between the ages of 12 and 13 at the time, so it was autobiographical of her few years of Japanese occupation in Korea before her and her little brother and mother escaped to the Americans. So I remember, I guess, the impact or the effect that this book had on me. I remember it being the first book that I had read that gave a real life experience of both the childhood coming of age and being aware of the kindness and also the atrocities of humanity. And also, no matter your age, at some point you have to come to, you face death. You have a relationship with death. And years later, through different experiences, I see how this book, in a way, prepared me and also informed me around understanding death and being able to accept and honor death.
We would have been friends then too.
Totally,
So it's
yeah.
like we would have been friends. We would have been friends. Oh man, then I wouldn't be doing the show, and I wouldn't need to, and then we wouldn't meet now. So maybe, yeah, we connect now. That's really wonderful. Wow. I'm actually astounded right now, because I don't ever expect a response that would be like exactly a mirror for my own feelings as a child, or mind or emotions, but somehow you both shared in these things. So I really appreciate that. Anyone else, or from the live stream? No. Maybe one more, yeah.
Can you hear me okay? Okay. I also have one that's a bit strange, and that's I was on holiday with my parents when I was about 11, and it was this poolside holiday, and I'd packed a couple of books that were appropriate reading material at the time, you know, books about little girls going on farms and boarding school. But I finished them after like 4 days, and I asked my mum, it's like, you know, if she had any other books with her that I could read. And I could see my mum think about it for a minute, and then she passed me this book that, I'm sorry, you won't know, because it's German. It's Christiane F., Wir Kinder vom Bahnhof Zoo, which you can hear by their reaction is a very, very inappropriate book to give to an 11-year-old, because it's a true story about like a 14-year-old girl in the Berlin of the late 1980s, I think, who becomes a heroin addict and then tries to get clean with the help of her mom, and like it's like a 400-page or 500-page book about this this horrible story. But it was, I don't know, maybe similar to the Petit Prince story there, the Little Prince story.
Yeah.
Maybe I probably remember it because it wasn't appropriate reading material, because it wasn't a children's book, because it was the first time that I was reading something that wasn't just, you know, a kid's story to pass the time, but something that, I don't know, really intrigued me in a way. Like it was really horrible, and a lot of it I didn't understand, of course. I mean, I was 11, but I somehow wanted to finish this book, and I did. Like at this, you know, impossible poolside holiday on Fuerteventura.
Poolside holiday.
Yeah.
Tragic heroin addict story
Yeah.
of a young girl.
I had a very troubled youth.
That just sums it right up, right? Okay. Right. Wait, you had a troubled youth that began before you were given this book.
Yeah, probably. No, I'm yeah, I don't know.
Probably.
I'm
Yeah.
not sure if I'm joking.
You're
right
not
now,
sure.
actually.
Oh. Wait a minute. I'm the one who's supposed to not know if I'm joking.
Yeah,
Wait.
okay. I'm with you.
Okay. Wow. This is like the deepest, darkest episode of this show that I've ever done, and I can't believe it's on the internet. Wow. I'm like being outsmarted by the audience right now or something. I don't even know where to go from here, but I think that now you'll actually all understand this. So it's like maybe when I talk about it, that for me, it's not. It won't seem weird to you. like I'm here among friends who aren't the Jessicas. Which, I have to be honest, right now it's like this feels very different than being in front of an anonymous audience. So even though we're far away from each other and you are wearing masks, I feel like this show is very different than what I'm used to when I do the show, because I'm connecting, and I didn't expect that, which is amazing. So when I was that age, I was reading The Diary of Anne Frank, and my friends were reading like Narnia. Do you know what that is? Yes, some of you do, yeah. And then there was actually an entire like subgenre of fiction written by Jewish authors that was about the Holocaust, like creating stories of survivors and what they had to go through, or resistance fighters, and I was obsessed with this subgenre, and I read like all the books. And the way it usually went would be like the girls died and the boys survived, and the boys were heroes and the girls were martyrs, and I didn't know which one I really was or wanted to be. But I was just excited to imagine that I would be like fighting. And because my friends had very different experiences of reading, like The Hobbit or like the Hardy Boys, this is like the era that had to do with obviously like boys who solve a mystery crime, like one crime, or like dragons who, I don't know what they do, because I never really cared, because I was so obsessed with what I was into, and I would create games around these things. Now I feel like if the people who spoke, if we knew each other then, you would have been really into my games, and we could have like swapped these books. I totally would have read that 400-page book about that girl, totally. And then I would have made up games and stuff about that. So it was like I would make up hide and seek games. Do you know what I mean? Hide and seek? Yeah. Except it would kind of be, it was just hide. So there wasn't really any seek. And it was for everybody to find like the best part of the house to hide in, where no one would find you. And then no one would find you. So then my friends were terrified because they might be stuck somewhere for a really long time or something like that. But then eventually I'd be like, you won the game. And they'd be like, who are you? You're like terrifying, you weirdo. But I was like, no, this is like not only a game, but it's real life skills. So I was sort of in this one whole world view. And also as a child trying to make sense of that view through games. And then my friends were in this entire other world view, where mine was definitely not fun, right? And was scary. Like there were no fake sword fights in my games and things like this. So, I mean, I tried my best at that time, not understanding at all what was wrong, or like how I was just kind of wrong, or wrong for them, or something like that. And then I had to get used to that in a way. So in the previous story, I had to get used to having an identity that was about being of service to a dominant one. And then in this example, it was more just kind of like the things that I wanted to explore, I had to keep to myself, actually. But not if I had met you. You would have played that game with me. Or when you said earlier, like, I developed an awareness of death when I read that book. You know, that's where I was at too. But I was I don't, actually, would you mind bringing the microphone back to this person? So, did you have friends who also read the book that were as into it as you were?
As I recall, so I had moved to this school, so it was my first year in this school. So I don't recall having any friends or anyone I don't remember the discussion of the book, I should say that, afterwards. But since then I have reread it several times, so.
Oh, you have?
Yeah, as an adult as well, just to
Wow.
revisit the story, so.
So, wow. So you were new to the school, and this was one of the first things you read at it?
I mean, 13's a blur.
I know.
Yeah. I can say that from the few details that blare out from that age and also from moving to a new school, I recall this book being an assignment and feeling very affected by the book and having read it several times later in my teenage years and also in my 30s. So.
But could you share how the book affected you with anyone?
I recall later in my 20s sharing about with friends, like talking about books and such, and being like, oh, it's not a complex read, but that it was quite a deep emotional story, because the author was writing it years later, but as she was writing it from the narrative of herself at the age of 12 or 13. So.
Right. So it didn't matter to you if others connected with the book the way you did or something?
Yeah, I've never really been a book club person, so the books that I read
Until
were
tonight.
Yeah, I guess
now
so,
we're
yeah.
gonna make a book club.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can
was gonna
suggest
make
it.
a joke,
It's a
but-
nice read. So
Say it again.
I can suggest the book. It's a nice read.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But most books that I've read have always just been for myself, and it never really mattered whether other people liked them or not, unless they were a suggestion from someone, and then.
Okay, I'm going to ask you another question, and this is new for me, too. Do you feel like what you experienced from reading that book informed your identity in any way, or brought light to your identity in any way?
Yeah, I think because she also came from a somewhat large extended family, and also that so her family ran a sock factory, and there were the women who ran the sock factory and were making socks for the Japanese soldiers. And I found somehow growing up in the South in America, having a large extended family, and somehow also having a larger community, and in a way that was 12, and in 13 I moved to the Northwest. And I could somehow in the story feel the relatability of having a community, an extended community around me, and then in a way having none of that. So in that sense of that transition, it was very somehow reflective of my own experience at the time, though completely different in the
So
sense
you
of,
could connect with someone from an entirely different culture and across time, still with certain aspects that you shared. Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the familial aspect and also the community aspect, and the value of that, and also the loss of that in a way. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, because, even though I also had the Diary of Anne Frank, and then I had this like subgenre of Holocaust fiction going on in my life, I didn't have any stories about disability history at all, or with disabled protagonists of such books. You know, like I didn't ever read any coming of age stories about disabled people or tough choices that they had to make, or anything about how a disabled girl was treated across time, or what she had to survive, or anything like that. And I, in retrospect, through trying to uncover these histories, have wondered what it would have been like if I could have read a book like that at that time. And if I was taught in any way that my identity wasn't this isolated, freakish other that I had also internalized, but that it was something shared by many people who themselves were survivors. So when I think about that, I go through a sense of mourning, because all that I really have about that identity for me is this kind of overwhelming absence. So speaking of being 14, now I'll get into some territory that the mom of the audience will be familiar with. I was in history class in high school, and we were learning World War II. And my teacher was a Catholic, very devout, and we really only learned history through having to memorize what each pope did. And actually, she passed away this year. So, hello, Mrs. Ellis. I hope you're hanging out with all those popes and it's going great for you. When we got to the part about the Holocaust, she pulled me aside after class, before the section, and she asked me if I would teach the section. Because according to her, I was the expert. And no, I know you're thinking, no, I didn't think there was anything fucked up about that. Because by now, if you follow the stories, I was somehow convinced that that was my role. So I thought, great, I'll prove myself. And I told her I would do it, and I told my parents, and they were so proud of me. And they said, oh, you're going to do the best job, and then everybody will understand anti-Semitism, and it won't happen again, and everybody will accept us. They really were being very optimistic for Jewish people. Let me tell you. I stutter because I feel guilty actually saying that, which I should be used to as well as a Jew, but no. Nobody laughed about that. Are there any Jews in the audience? I wasn't expecting it, but I just thought I'd ask. Maybe on the live stream, there might be one or two. So I memorized what I could, and I got myself ready for this class. I curled my hair with a curling iron. I put lip gloss on, like bubble gum or something gross that you think is really cute then, right? And then I had a button-up shirt that I buttoned correctly and got to the class. And you know, I had a hidden agenda as well as like vindicating anti-Semitism for all time. I also had a crush in the class. His name was Vinny. And I thought that I would impress him by doing this, and that he would also understand me, and that I would be this like heroine princess kind of character in my own fantasy about this. So I really wanted to impress Vinny. And I get to the class, and I'm standing in front of it to teach this thing. And the teacher rolls out this ancient reel-to-reel film camera. So it's like there are slides that go in a loop through the camera, the projector, and then it comes out, and you can hear like the clicks of all the images that it goes through. So it's like there's the pace of the clicking, and there are the images behind me. And right when she brings it out, I'm like, what's that? None of us had ever seen that before, because actually by that time there was TV, you know? So she said, that's the media. And I was like, when was this media made? Like, how soon after the war was this media made? And how did it get to this town in the United States in this way? So she starts to play the reel-to-reel, and the images start to go. And I don't know what's behind me. I'm just trying to keep up, you know? So I'm speaking, and then I look behind me, and there are images of mass graves, you know, one after another, of people being shot and begging for their lives, and of labor. And everybody here, I'm sure, has seen these images so many times in your lives as well. You have to understand that no one in this town had seen those images. So for these kids, this was the first time they're seeing them. And for me, it wasn't the first time seeing them, but it was definitely unexpected while I'm standing in front of them. So I realized right away, Vinny wouldn't become my boyfriend from doing this. But also, really, that for them, I was that. I was always going to be that. And no matter what I did, there was nothing I could really do about that. And I've wondered all the time if Mrs. Ellis, sorry lady, but whatever, you're dead. You got to deal with it now. If she actually knew what she was doing when she asked me to do that, you know? If it was a way of putting me in my place to remind me in some way, or if she really thought that somehow it was my own moral responsibility to represent my race or something like this. It's always been curious to me how that happened. Somehow I realize I've told that story the most honestly tonight. And it's probably because of the people here and being able to be honest. I went to the synagogue here where the boy was attacked when I arrived on Monday. And I've heard many things about, like, the attacker being mentally ill, and this is an isolated incident, and things that are told about hate crimes over and over. There's Hebrew lettering on the front of the synagogue that my friend and I uncovered, like my friend who might watch this as well later. And to summarize it, it's like, peace be unto everybody within these walls, and may flourishing happen for you as well. So there's something about the contrast between what could happen in front of those words and what those words mean. I saw that there were like flowers and candles in front of the gate there. And there were police that were walking around, which, you know, I can understand the reasoning behind that, but I feel like how could it be that police in that instance would symbolize something safe? Not for me. I wasn't expecting that, though, when I came to Hamburg to do this show at all. I wasn't expecting such a direct reminder about why I even do this show. So if you live here, you should go to the synagogue. And you should bring some flowers, and you should put them there. And you should walk around and look at the synagogue. You should walk around the whole block and think about it. Don't let it be that people just like me are doing that. This is a time in the show where I usually then talk about disability and what happened to disabled people before World War II and during and after. But I usually, when I lead up to it, am not already sad and devastated. But I'm feeling that way tonight. Maybe it's because it's Shabbat. So I wanted to talk about some of the research I've been doing about Action T4 that I only learned about when I came to Germany, and which I certainly never, ever learned in high school. But when I did ask you about life unworthy of life, and a lot of you knew about it, did any of you learn about this in high school? Just raise your hands. Oh my goodness, where did you go to school? If you could bring the mic over. Or, yeah, it could be anybody. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. What did you learn?
Well, I went to school in Hamburg, first of all, and yeah, I mean, we talked lots about the Holocaust, and there was definitely a lot about the various groups of people that were prosecuted, the various groups of people that were deemed unfit for living, and I remember learning also about what happened to people with disabilities, homosexuals, and with Jews, obviously. But like, yeah, I remember that also being like part of my book, like there, and then showing us like the different kinds of like armbands that people would wear, like the yellow triangle, I think was that the one for homosexuality? I don't know, maybe something.
That was the Jew one.
That was
The pink one was the...
Well, the star was the Jew one,
Yeah.
but there was a yellow triangle.
Just a triangle.
Just a triangle, yeah, but I don't know. Don't quote me on this.
That's okay. Yeah. So, but did you learn anything about what happened to disabled people specifically, or no?
Well,
Just about the
I remember learning about, was it called Lebensborn? This initiative where they were like trying to breed the perfect mix of Aryans or whatever, and yeah, there was definitely like alongside that, it was mentioned that there were other forms of life that were not deemed fit, and that if babies were born looking a certain way, for example, that they were euthanized.
Okay.
I seem to remember learning that in school.
Right. Anyone else want to say what they learned? Go ahead.
Very close to where I grew up was actually in, I think the English word is asylum, and like a living or like a hospital, I don't know, for disabled people and for people with mental illnesses. And of course, that's during the Second World War, that's the place where these people were euthanized. Like beforehand, they just lived there or were treated, and then this just turned into like a mini concentration camp. And in school, we learned about that because it's very close and it's within the area. And
where was it?
It's in the middle of Germany, Hesse, Rheinland-Pfalz. It's near Frankfurt.
And what was...
The place is called Hadamar.
Hadamar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember that when I learned that in school, and we had like talks with people who work for this place is now a museum, and like people who work for that, and they taught us about it. And then I went home and asked my my grandma about it. Like, do you remember this happening? And
Yeah.
she said like, well, you know, there was always smoke coming out of the chimney. We were wondering about that. Like, yeah, that was peculiar back then, but like the typical thing, we didn't know anything. Yeah.
Right.
And I think I was like also like 13, 14, something like that. And
Wow.
yeah, I didn't really understand that she was, pretending to not know. I just believed her when she said she didn't know anything, but much later I understood what this was actually like about. And but the places like right now, people are doing research there, and
Yeah.
you can-
Kenny has an amazing story about there that he could share actually when we speak. But yeah, so Hadamar is one of the 6 killing sites. And just to be clear, they're killing sites. So it's called the euthanasia, but it's not euthanasia, it's killing. And there was lots of experimentation that happened about ways to kill. That happened far before gases were brought into it. So there were many, many painful deaths that occurred in these sites. And there were approximately 300,000 people who were killed from this. I visited some of those sites. I definitely never, ever learned about this. I had no images of anyone who was killed, and I didn't know any names of anyone who was killed. I have no idea what their lives were like, but I know that they had lives. I mean, not that long ago. If I were alive then, I wouldn't be standing in front of you now. I would have been one of those lives unworthy of life. Whenever I have gone to memorials or sites, I really try to imagine any kind of story that I could. Just making them up in my mind, really, of people with full lives who knew what was happening to them and had no choice. And I wondered about ways that they might have tried to resist, however small or large. I wondered about ways that they might have tried to comfort themselves when they had to face their deaths, from a bunch of people who pretended to be caring for them. So here to speak about this history a little bit more is Kenny, who's going to come up on this screen shortly. And the song that I chose for him, his entry song on Zoom, is Barbra Streisand, It Had to Be You. So, some gentleness.
Seems like dreams like I always had could be, should be making me glad. Why am I blue? It's up to you to explain.
Hi, Kenny.
Hi, Perel.
How are you tonight?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm okay. I don't know. I've gone through so many waves in the show tonight.
I've noticed.
You noticed? Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to say, like, I'm maybe a little bit maudlin, which is maybe quite a word to say, an English word, but I also don't know if that's true or not, or... What do you think of that word?
Maudlin?
Maudlin, yeah.
It reminds me of Halloween, but which Europeans don't know as much about as we do in the United States.
Okay. Do you ever feel maudlin?
Come on, if you know I do, most of the time.
How is it different than sad?
I think it's heavier than sad and more disturbing, kind of ghoulish.
Ghoulish. That's
Yeah.
why it reminds you of Halloween.
Yeah.
Okay. Ghoulish. I think that's okay. Ghoulishness. Yeah.
Yeah, especially for this story.
truly. Kenny, will you speak to us about your research for this book that you're working on, please? And
Sure.
speak to us about the book itself.
Yeah, the story behind the book is called Stumbling Over History, Disability and the Holocaust. But that was not what I came to Germany 7 years ago in 2013 on a DAD grant. I came to research the lives of disabled people who grew up in what was East Germany. And as I did that, I literally, even when I was just touring around, I literally stumbled over history. I kept stumbling over the history of disabled people in Germany before East Germany, even before the war, even before the Third Reich. So that's what I did for, started 7 years ago. And I think around a year and a half later, I decided I was going to go to all of the 6 T4 killing sites. No idea why. I mean, I knew I wanted to know more, but I had no idea why I wanted to go to those places. So, but that's what I did, and that became the narrative structure for the book, is my visits to the 6 sites.
Would you mind, so I know you've prepared some reading for us from your writing, and I know that you were going to read about Pirna, which I still want you to do, but because there's someone in the audience who grew up near Hadamar, would you mind speaking a little bit about your experience of going there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Hadamar was the first. I knew that disabled people were killed. I knew from actually the U.S. TV miniseries Holocaust, which I know is, when it was broadcast in Germany, was very important to people here, to knowing about the whole history of the Holocaust. So I heard about Hadamar through my friend Rebecca Maskos introduced me to Andreas Heckler, Andy, whose great-grandmother was killed at Hadamar. So that was the first time I actually heard the word Hadamar. So Hadamar was one of the first places I went to, and I don't want to spoil the book, but I recently completed a video series, a series of 6 videos based on my visits, one for each visit, and I recount some of this in my trip to Hadamar.
Hold on a second, Kenny. You can find those on YouTube, right?
Yes,
they're available.
Yeah,
yes.
Just go Kenny Freese YouTube. It'll come up. It's the only videos that I have up there.
Okay.
There's 6 of them, so I mean, Hadamar will always be an important place for me, because it was the first place that I actually did this research. One at the sites, and people I don't know if it was mentioned earlier. I was listening, but I don't remember that it's still a psychiatric institution. It's still a facility. And I was very struck by the person who was talking about, I can't see them, I could just hear them, about the seeing the smoke and not being told what it was, or et cetera and so forth. So yeah, so that's Hadamar. I mean, Hadamar was the first place I saw a gas chamber. And I'm not going to go into what happened on my way down to the gas chamber. You'll have to go watch the video for that.
Oh, tease.
Yes.
Ooh. Creepy tease.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I know what happened because I watched the videos.
Yeah. Well, I told you about it before the videos.
I guess it's true. I have a question, because you know that we all will speak to each other if people want to after the show in the other room. Would I be allowed to tell them about what happened?
No, I think they should watch it.
You just have to watch the videos.
Yeah, because
I think we should link to them on the webpage, maybe.
Sure.
Somehow.
Yeah, it's just too. It's an internal experience that happened when I was there. So you telling the story, it's kind of secondhand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I get it. Would you mind reading the passage about your experience of being a vicarious witness?
Sure.
Thank you.
I was always looking for a framework for the book, and it took a while to find it, but I found it through Suzanne C. Knittel, who was a memory studies scholar. She's German, but she teaches at the University of Utrecht in the Netherlands. And she grew up near Grafneck, which is another of the T4 sites. And she talks in her book called The Historical Uncanny about this idea of the vicarious witness. And I talk about that in the section of my book on Brandenburg, which was the first killing site, and also where the quote unquote test killing took place at the beginning of sometime in the early January 1940. There's still not, you only have to deduce from various things what the date was. There's no record of the exact date. So, and that's actually this part is in the first video. The videos are based on excerpts from the book. So this is in that first video. No documents from the test killing have been preserved. According to information at the memorial, who the murdered patients were and where they came from is unknown. What is known comes primarily from post-war testimony of those involved or thought to be involved in what took place that day. Unlike the Holocaust, there are no T4 survivors. We know about T4 and its aftermath mainly through medical records and from the perpetrators. Action T4 does not have its Elie Wiesel or Primo Levi. That is the main reason I write about what happened to disabled people during the Third Reich. I want to be what Suzanne C. Knittel and other scholars call a vicarious witness. Ms. Knittel describes this not as an act of speaking for and thus appropriating the memory and story of someone else, but rather an attempt to bridge the silence through narrative means. This is my way of bridging the silence, of keeping alive something that is too often forgotten.
Every time you read that, I'm stunned. No matter how many times we do the show, or I have watched your videos, and I have read your articles, every time I hear you read that, it hits me in the same way. I think it's because of your voice and how you're able to so beautifully express something that is filled with so much pain.
Well, thank you. I mean, it takes it takes a village. No, it takes it takes the right amount of distance and distance and closeness, and it's really hard to get.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I'm wondering if I could also then ask you about Suzanne C. Knittel's theory of multi-directional memory as well, and how that plays into the way that you try to construct the stories of these places.
Yeah, I don't think it's actually her theory. I mean, I think she talks about it extensively in her work. I think it's a tenet of memory studies. If I'm not, I'm not a scholar. I forgot to say that last night. I'm not a scholar. I'm a creative writer. So I don't come at this subject from a historian's point of view. So multi-directional memory. So my understanding, which is still growing and developing, is that because we don't have the exact experiences, we don't have survivors to talk about what happened, we need to go back in time and forward in time to understand the totality of of what happened to disabled people during Action T4. So as I mentioned when we first started talking, that I realized I had to go back not only to the Third Reich but beforehand. And a good example of that is the study in 1923 by Dr. Ewald Meltzer, who in 23, he surveyed the parents of his disabled patients and asked them what they would think, what their reaction would be to if their disabled children were killed. And to his great surprise and great chagrin, he didn't really, he wasn't a eugenicist as far as I know. 73% of the parents he surveyed said that it would be okay for their disabled children to be killed if they didn't know about it. So that shows that this is not something that just happened, you know, on the spur of the moment in German society. I mean, eugenics was happening all over the world. People were sterilized in the United States, in the UK, in Canada, et cetera, and so forth. But it shows that people were building on a feeling that was there already, and that is still there. I mean, you want to take it, you know, go back and forth. I mean, multi-directional memory, talk about what's gone on for disabled people during the pandemic and how eugenic ideas have cropped up again in triage protocols and who will get care, et cetera, and so forth. So, and that's again, not in the UK, in the United States, and it's been everywhere, in Italy. So I also bring it forth to things that might seem unrelated, but I see as related. I think you actually brought it up in tonight's show briefly. This whole idea that if you look at the disabled people that were killed, let's just start with the 70,000 that were killed in the actual Action T4 program, because there was around 70,000 that were killed in T4. The program officially ended, and then there was 230,000 people that were killed by gas and by other means after the official program ended. So that's what we get around the 300,000. So if you give only the 70,000 disabled people who were killed in Action T4, you give them two parents, you give them siblings, you give them cousins, you give them aunts, you give them grandparents, you give them friends, you're already probably up into the millions of people. And so I always wondered what would happen if those millions of people actually protested and did something that might this not have happened. We don't know. So I fast forward to what happened during the early HIV/AIDS pandemic, where mostly gay men were dying in the United States. And if you give those men who were dying two parents and brothers and sisters and cousins and aunts and uncles and grandparents and friends, you again have millions and millions of people. And again, and there was no mass protest. There was nothing was done until the people with HIV and AIDS themselves started organizations like ACT UP and basically changed everything. And that's why we had medications and et cetera and so forth. So that's an example of just right there, we went from, Action T4 back to 1923, up to pandemic and back to the 90s with HIV/AIDS.
Right. Yeah, I guess, I mean, something I landed on during the monologue was about how, there is this idea of moving on and of the future and of progress. But at the same time, what are you laughing about?
Because my maudlin thought is progress.
Exactly. Well, that's what I was going for.
Yeah.
I was going to say, then when you're looking at really what is possible, it sort of repeats and repeats and repeats, right?
Yeah. I mean, my I don't know where I've said this, but I know I don't know if I've written it, I probably have somewhere. Until these underlying notions about certain people who are deemed other, in this case, we're talking about disabled people, changes, these things can and will happen in various forms. I mean, in Japan, a few years back, someone who worked at an institution killed patients. He was no longer employed there. He went back and killed the patients. And he basically said the same thing, life unworthy of life. There was a mercy killing, it was euthanasia. It happens in all its permeations many, many times in many, many cultures.
Yes. I had wanted to ask you to read the passage on Purna. And do you feel up to it? I know you've actually spoken a lot.
No, it's fine. It's very short.
Okay.
I could do that. I'm trying to find the right context for it. You had talked earlier in the show about something about imagining what the people felt and the comfort that they might be searching for, et cetera, and so forth. I'm putting words into your mouth.
That's fine. I put words into my mouth all the time, and everybody else's.
You remember that part? What you said earlier?
It was before you came on stage.
Yeah.
Yeah. That when I have gone to memorials and killing sites, that's what I try to think about, to give a voiceless, nameless group of people that I'm related to an identity.
Yeah. So that's a decent context for this. I mean, Purna Schauenstein is not far from Dresden, for those that might not know. What's interesting about the site at Purna is there's not much there. I mean, there's not much that's left. It's very small traces of what, a door hinge, things like that. There's no gas chamber left. There's no things like that, and that's kind of very interesting. But here's something that I found at Purna that was very important to me. Further on, there are bricks behind a plastered wall. This is where the crematorium once stood. In the same room, there is a vitrine containing small possessions displayed on small multi-level shelves, once belonging to the victims. A comb, a flower-shaped brooch, figurines of a boy and girl in 19th century attire, personal objects found among the ashes strewn on a hill just outside. This display of objects reinstates in small but resonant ways the individuality that photos not always seem able to portray, though we do not know who precisely owned each memento. But what survived the crematorium fire was clearly important in some never-to-be-known way to each patient. This is what they took with them when leaving more familiar surroundings to a place unknown. I could only imagine the terror when being undressed, of leaving behind in a pocket a treasured, perhaps long-held object that provided untold comfort and unexpressed meaning. Some objects seem utilitarian, like a comb that has been melted a rusty beige and could be mistaken for a burnt harmonica. Another seems like a small frame, or is it a pendant with a stick-like figure whose body is Y-shaped with uplifted arms. It could have once been painted. What looks like white and red paint remain in granulated patches in both the figure and the frame.
Thank you. Well, Kenny, now is the time when we need to say goodbye, which neither of us ever likes. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so those of us who are here in the room and want to continue to talk about some of these things will go into a separate room to have an informal chat over some beers. And if you were here with us in person, you would be coming with us. But even if you're not here physically, we will talk about you. and we will bring you into the room with us. And I actually feel like whenever I have to hang up on Zoom, I get sad or depressed or something, and I feel like there needs to be a new name for that emotion now, like the post-Zoom blues or something.
We could just call it postpartum depression.
Postpartum? Who came out of whom? Anyway, I don't want you to get the post-Zoom blues.
No, Mike is here. We'll be okay.
Okay. So Kenny and I are going to bow together tonight. So we can have the bow music play. Okay, ready? No, I'm not ready yet. You have to do it again. You have to lift your head up.
I think it's still like that.
Okay, ready?
Yep.
1, 2, 3. Thank you. Yesterday's